conflicts, where I hope they will invite me to write a contribution. And most importantly, for all the entitled people, he is the senior editor of Capitalism, Nature, Socialism. So we invite you to think about where to submit your article, and also think about
especially if you want to destroy your academic career. You are welcome to publish with us. It's a very, it's a very mainstream journal, no problem. I think that Yale has a special, path for people publishing Capitalist, Nature, or Socialism. They are a little bit uncertain between Radical History Review and Capitalist, Nature, and Socialism. You can pick whatever you wish. Thank you, Salvatore. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak here today. When I started to think about what could I tell you today, I was discussing with Salvatore and Guy, about my presentation, and try to avoid to say always the same stuff, which is also something that we academics are very good of. We are recycling. We really recycling ourselves, more or less. So I try not to recycle my old PowerPoint. And so the idea was to speak with you about the article, Seeing Like a Protester. I published it, by the way, in 2009 on Left History, again a very mainstream journal. And but the idea for me was that, since I am sure that you all have read this article because it's in the readings for this summer school, my idea was to try to come here and to tell you actually a story. Why? Well, first of all, on one hand, I must say that as an historian, I don't know if you agree with me, but generally speaking, historians are not very good with theory, very complicated methodologies. We are kind of, naive, very simple guy. And if there is something in which we are good at, probably, especially the good historians are good at, is telling stories. We should be, this is what we should be. We should be good storytellers. So I will try to tell you a story. Of course, this story will be connected with the article that I suggested you to take a look, this Seeing Like a Protester. The main point in that article, I would say, is the idea that looking through the lens of conflicts, looking as a protester, is a way to better understanding not just the social into the nature, but actually the merging of nature, of the natural and the social. And I made in that article two examples, the forest and the dump. And the idea I try to make in that article is that if we look at that forest through the lens of conflicts, seeing like a protester, it's easier to see not only the social conflicts and the social power relationship embedded in that forest, but also the ecological relationship which are in that forest. Because a forest is a wood, is tree, is soil, is water, is game, it's many things. And the same is also true for the dump. I try to make the point that looking at the political ecology of garbage in Naples, in Italy, is a way to understand not just the production, consumption and reproduction of garbage, but also, I think, the power relationship which make wasted people and wasted land. And those relationships are embodied into the landscape, so in the geography of landfills, but also in the body of the very people living there. But I will not talk with you today about garbage in Naples. I think that you are sick. You have Giacomo all times. You have Salvatore. I know that. I am sure that you know about garbage more than I do. So my idea is to tell you instead another story, which hopefully is connected, and I will try to show you in which way, to the main article that I suggested. So this Seeing Like a Protester. And while I am starting to tell you this story, I will also use some image from a documentary from that period. Well, I didn't prepare a PowerPoint, and I decided not to propose you a PowerPoint, not only because I am a lazy person, and not only because I didn't want to recycle any older PowerPoint, but because I was trying to make a point. The point is the centrality of storytelling, the centrality of words, with not so many images and graphics. So imagine it's it's the 9th of October 1963. Imagine to be in a very small town up in the Alps, more or less in the area of Venice. This town, the name of this town is Longarone. And imagine that you are pretty much happy watching a soccer game in a bar, because at that night, it's more or less 40 minutes past 10, there was a very important soccer game, and so everybody was watching this game on television. And you have to consider that at that time, televisions, the people didn't have television in their home, so many times families, they actually gathered together to watch television. Well, suddenly there was some noise, a huge noise. The soil started trembling. People felt something in the air, like some musty, some water. What happened was that 300 million cubic meters of rock fell into a reservoir. The dam was able to stay. The dam of the reservoir didn't collapse, was actually still there. But this gigantic mass of rock was able to to create a wave of water, 50 million cubic meter of wave. The water overcame the dam, and moving at a velocity of about 100 kilometers per hour, entered into the valley, destroying everything. 2,000 people were killed. The little town where we were was completely destroyed. You can see more or less from the image. So this is the story of the Vajont disaster. And I would like to ask, how many people know about the Vajont? Anybody has a clue about the Vajont? Let's say the one that I didn't tell about. Okay, a little bit less. Very good. Well, you know, you have your own obsession. So, well, this is strange, because in 2008, the United Nations, precisely the UNESCO, put the Vajont disaster in the list of what they called the 5 precautionary tales. So some stories that, according to them, were able to teach us, humanity, something about the way in which we deal with the environment. And according to UNESCO, to the United Nations, the Vajont disaster specifically tells one story, the story of the inability of experts, of engineers, geologists, not so much to do, their job, because as I said, the dam is still there. The dam didn't collapse. So we could say that the dam was well done, was well built. The problem is that those people were unable to understand the context where they were operating, everything else. So what is incredible about this story is that the dam is still there, but the mountain is more or less not there anymore, because it's the mountain that collapsed, not the dam. So I believe that the story of the Vajont is a powerful story about science, politics, and modernization. And I believe that we can try to explore this story, seeing like a protesters, or seeing that story through the lens of conflicts. First of all, sure, we have to look at this story through the lens of conflicts, seeing like a protester. But maybe, as Eric was saying this morning, it's also interesting sometimes to look as not the protester, but actually as the bad guys. In this story, so for instance, let's try to look at the Vajont not like a protester, at least not now, but let's try to look at the Vajont as an engineer, as an entrepreneur. So for them, what was possible to see looking through their eyes? Well, for them, they were able, those people, engineers, entrepreneurs, they were able to see a hidden landscape, which was impossible to be seen by others. It was a landscape made by kilowatts and turbines. It was a landscape made by flux of energy, power, and money. But I don't want you to I don't want be misunderstood. Those people were not cold-blood, capitalists. They were actually admirers of the beauty of nature, believe or not. For instance, one of the engineer, actually the big guy in the story, Carlo Semenza, this is his name. Carlo Semenza was actually member of the Italian Alpine Club. He wrote the guide, the touristic guide, to the Eastern Alps, the Dolomites. And just to give you an idea, when he was dead, after his death, the Italian Alpine Club named one of his small hotels up in the Alps with his name. So you can go to the Carlo Semenza Huts in the Dolomites. So he was actually an admirer of nature, because when we think about admiring nature, it's not always what we usually think it must be. For them, for Carlo Semenza for sure, admiring nature means that nature was a powerful force, was a beautiful landscape, but the intervention of technology, of technical expertise and so on, could make it even better. There was no contradiction between the beauty of nature and the beauty of technology. It was Richard White is a very famous environmental historian. He would say that it was an organic machine, a machine ready to be used. And the beauty of that machine was that it was a machine. There was a fascination with this, at least for these people. And those are the main Carlo Semenza. No? Indeed, the Vajont Valley was, and actually all the valley where the Vajont is, so it's the Piave Valley. Piave is the biggest river there in that area. The Piave Valley was a hydroelectric laboratory. This is the word used actually by one of these engineers, Augusto Datei. It was a modernistic lab, and as every modernistic lab, there was no room in that lab for the imperfection of the real world, neither for the local knowledge of people living there. Actually, since it was a lab, of course nobody was supposed to live there. The lab, by definition, is closed, is sealed to the outside. And so the Piave Valley should be a lab without any interference from the outside world. What is amazing about the Vajont project is, first of all, the expansion, the rising of the project during the year. So it started in 1920s as a kind of small project. The dam was supposed to be 150 meters high, and so the reservoir was supposed to contain more or less 50 million cubic meters of water. Then, in the end, in the 1960s, the dam became 260 meters high, and the reservoir contained 150 million cubic meters of water. Why it's important to see this raising, this growing of the project? Because in comparison with these continuous transformations and actually enlargement of the project, there was no checking, no control by public authorities. So the corporation could actually change and enlarge the project without any kind of checking. Just to give you an idea, the first permission to build the Vajont system, the dam and the reservoir, came to the corporation in 1943. And well, here history is relevant. 1943 was a time in which it was even difficult to find some kind of government in Italy. The country was, split in two. There was the southern part with the Anglo-Americans coming, and then there was the fascist, Nazi-fascists, whatever republic you want to call. So it was, divided in two. But anyway, the corporation, this hydroelectric corporation, was able to find 13 people in Rome who was able to sign a permission. They could start to build the Vajont reservoir. So actually, the whole story of the Vaillant, the permission and the authority about the Vaillant is very interesting. For instance, you have to consider that the permission to build the Vaillant, the final one, in 1957, arrived without any geological report. So it was given the permission to build what was at that time the highest arched dam in the world without even a geological report. The geological report was pending. The guy supposed to write the geological report is this one, is Giorgio Dal Piaz, probably the most famous Italian geologist at that time. Well, the guy didn't write the report in the end. Now we know that he wrote a letter to Carlo Semenza, his friend, working for the corporation, and he said, more or less, this were his words. Please, could you write a geological report for you, and I will sign it, and please let me know the date when I did it. So there was no geological report for the dam. So I said, seeing like an engineer, seeing like a geologist, but also seeing like an entrepreneur, for instance. In that case, I would say that for them, for an entrepreneur, for a corporation, the land in the Vaillant Valley was a land without history, without practices, without memories. To be more precise, was a land in which only one kind of property rights was allowed, and it was of course private property rights. Instead, in the old area, what was very strong was common property. Well, for the corporation there was no space for that, so they just bought a lot of lands from local municipalities, implying that commons were actually owned by local municipalities, which were actually not allowed to sell lands which were not theirs. So this was one issue, and I would say that I would call this a legal repression. The legal repression here is essentially the obliteration of different way of owning and of organizing property rights and access to the land. But what is also interesting about this legal repression is that it's not all about property rights. The new geography of production and power created by the corporation produced an off-limits area in the mountains, enclosing the reservoir. So in other words, it was impossible for the communities living around to access also the common lands, because there was some rules that protecting the reservoir made impossible for them to access the land freely. So, speaking about, so we have seen here some kind of legal, what I have said, it's a legal repression. Now I would like to tell you the story of the people dealing with this new landscape, with this capitalistic landscape created by the corporation. And I would say that the resistance of local people maybe we can say that was articulated in three different phases of resistance. So we will start with the first phase. The first phase was resistance to appropriation and expropriation by the corporation. So the corporation, and here again we can see very clearly on one hand the legal repression, so the imposition of one system, one kind of property rights, and on the other hand we can also see the violent or military repression, and I will try to explain you why and in which way. So the corporation was working under the umbrella, I would say, under the name of public utility. According to the Italian government, the corporation was building that reservoir, that dam, not for making profits, but actually for the common good of the nation. Why this is very relevant? Because for the local communities, for the local people, there were only two options: selling the land or be expropriated. There was no third option. So they had just two possibilities, or sell or be expropriated. So they created the first committee, a local committee chaired actually by the mayor of this small village, Ertocasso, Caterina Filippin. They created the first committee to try to resist to this expropriation and appropriation of the land. And the committee failed. The committee failed, but not only because there was no way the corporation had all the power to acquire, to expropriate the lands, but actually the committee failed also for another reason, because the corporation was actually able to defeat the committee. The corporation started to make agreement, with individual families, dividing the group of people, of local people, and so in the end the committee just, was disrupted by this kind of activities. And then I told you that there was also some kind of what we could say military or violent repression. Well, for the first time in this very remote alpine village, the police arrived. The police opened a local station in that village just when the corporation arrived. And it's very clear, it was very clear that even if it was, the public police, it was not a private police, it was actually acting as a private police for the corporation. Just to give you an example, all the people involved in the committee were sooner or later arrested for some reason, including deputies from the national parliament. And I will try to discuss about this a little bit later. The Communist Party, the Italian Communist Party, was very much involved in this. And Giorgio Bettiol, the communist leader of the area, was continuously put in jail by this local police. So, military repression, legal repression. And then I would like to move here to the second phase of resistance. So when the land was lost, the corporation was already, building the dam and so on. The second phase of the resistance was the resistance against the hazards, the risks coming from the dam. And it started very soon. The local people, they knew that building that dam was very, very risky for them. Just to give you an example, in the local dialect, the very name of the mountain, Monte Toc, means something like the rotten mountain. So it was not very reassuring to build the highest arched dam in the world with a huge reservoir on the slope of the rotten mountain, as you can imagine. But the local people were not only, using their own knowledge. What is also interesting is the way in which they try to translate their local knowledge in the official language of science. So, in other words, they hired a geologist, who was not that guy, by the way. It was Ervinio Milli. And he was not somebody working in the university. And we will come back to this later in this presentation. Ervinio Milli wrote a very important report saying that it was very risky, very dangerous to build the dam. So the local people, they were not just using their local knowledge, but they tried also to challenge the official knowledge, but there was no way. The corporation was too powerful. So they created a new informal committee. And you have to think that there was people from the mountains. It was the 50s. So they were using a very, I would say, moderate repertoire of mobilization. You shouldn't think about, huge urban riots with, fires and Molotov cocktails in the streets. They were, poor people from the mountains. So what they did, they started writing letters to the authorities. Then they tried to do some petitions, and then tried to involve the politicians, from the regional level, from the national level, and so on. And then in the end, especially in the last phase of the story, they also started some kind of grassroots monitoring of the situation. Just to give you an idea, they did some kind of wooden stitch with some notches on them. So they put this wooden stitch on the on the wall where there were some fissure or on the soil to see if the soil was actually moving, and they were registering with the notches on these stitches. But what happened was that on one end you have these very primitive ways of monitoring the situation. Then you have, and on the other end the corporation had seismographers. On one end you have local people, peasants, making the point that there were noises coming from the mountains, and on the other end you have geologists saying that everything was fine. On one end you have the mayor of a remote village on the top of the Alps asking for protection, and on the other end you have a very powerful CEO of a very big, huge corporation saying that everything was under control. So in the end, modernity, science, knowledge was on one side of the table, and unfortunately there was no way to make them changing the situation. This is very interesting. You have seen the documentary at the beginning of my talk. Well, somebody, a journalist from the Italian public television, asked to the people after the disaster, this guy asked to the people, well, you knew that there was something wrong. Why you didn't leave? And so this woman said, well, we didn't because we believed that we were ignorant, and you knew better. And this is, I think, very interesting, speaking about the power of the hegemony of power, the construction of an hegemonic knowledge. Before moving to the third phase of the story, I would like to speak a little bit about one figure which is very relevant, who is very relevant in the story. This is Tina Merlin. Tina Merlin was a communist, a journalist, a former partisan. She fought against the Nazi-fascist occupation, and she wrote a series of articles regarding the Vajont situation on the Journal of the Italian Communist Party, L'Unità. In 1959, she was accused of, and I am quoting here, spreading false and misleading information aiming to subvert public order, because she was writing about the dangers coming from the dam. And so she actually was, went on trial, she was on court. But for a very strange situation, the corporation, the hydroelectric corporation, lose that trial. Tina Merlin and the journal, the communist newspaper, won the trial. And according to the judges in Milan, there was no way that they were spreading false and misleading information. They were just reporting what everybody in the valley was saying about the dam. Unfortunately, nobody was going after this, kind of sentence. So they were safe. There was no problem for the journal and for Tina Merlin, but nothing was done about the corporation and the dam. But even more interesting that the article written and published in 1959 is another article. Tina wrote and published an article in 1961, so 2 years before the massacre. And in that article, Tina Merlin wrote very clearly that a landslide was going to happen, according to her 50 million meter cubic of rocks, and probably the dam would collapse, and there would have been a major disaster. So we might say that on one end, Tina was wrong. The slide was much bigger, and the dam is still there. So what is interesting is not so much the technical part of the article, but actually the fact that she was able to write an article 2 years in advance of what was happening. And this is very relevant also for what is going to happen later, because a big issue in the story is if this disaster was something, natural, completely impossible to predict, or actually was something planned by the corporation. Or at least, they knew very well in advance, and they didn't act. They didn't act to stop it. So the third phase of the resistance is what happened later, after the massacre. 2,000 people were dead. And so the third phase of the resistance is about recognition, compensation, and memory. I think that in this third phase of the resistance, I believe that there are in place all the kind of repression and resistance that I have tried to enlighten so far. So there is a legal repression, there is an epistemic repression, and there is, of course, a violent or military repression. I will try to stress now with you especially the epistemic repression and a little bit about the legal repression. Why epistemic repression? Science and experts were very relevant in all this story. We have seen how the geologists were completely, they were just working for the corporation. They were not, doing actually their job. But after the disaster, the things became even clearer, because no one in the Italian universities wanted to stand up and work for the public prosecutor officer or the lawyer working for the survival. I think that the English word is the counselor for plaintiffs. So the survivors, they hire a lawyer to defend their interest. And actually, the lawyer was Giovanni Canestrini, who was a member of the Italian Communist Party. Well, nobody in the Italian universities wanted to work with them. So you have to imagine, if you can imagine, picture the court where the trial was in charge. You have to imagine on one side there was the public prosecutor officer, Mario Fabbri, Giovanni Canestrini, the communist lawyer defending the survivor, and 4 people working with them. 3 of them were not Italians, and there was just one guy from Italy. His name was Floriano Calvino, and you are now thinking Calvino, yes, he was the brother of Italo. He was an adjunct professor of geology at the University of Genoa. And well, guess what? He was fired. He was an adjunct professor. He didn't have a tenure. So immediately after joining the public prosecutor officers, now working as an expert for him, he was fired by the university. On the other side, the people working for the corporation, you have to think about more or less 170 Italian professors, engineers, geologists, people expert in hydraulics and so on, working for them. It was very important, the issue of experts, because as I said, what was very important is to understand the predictability of the event. And according to the accusation, the public officer, the event was indeed predictable. The event was pretty much, they knew pretty much that the event was happening. The other issue, so I would say that this is a big problem. Now this is another issue about the epistemic repression, the fact that it was impossible to stand up, and at least it was more or less, this is what happened in the story. Then the second aspect of the story is the politicization of the event versus the naturalization of the event. Of course, the survivors, the people, the local people, they were trying to politicizing the event. They were making the point that that event was a political event. And the Italian Communist Party was pretty much instrumental in doing this. The Italian Communist Party, well, first of all with Tina Merlin, but then also after the massacre, they said that the problem was not, just a mistake made by someone. It was a systemic problem. It was the idea that profits need to regulate, the relationship between humans and nature. So it was a general critique, and not just, a specific issue related with some specific people in the public authorities, in the corporation, or in the local government, and so on. It's interesting because everybody in Italy, especially, the mainstream newspapers, mass media, the church, of course, and the government, at that time, Christian democratic government, as always in Italy, more or less. They were saying that the Communist Party, they were jackals. They were taking advantage of that event for their political agenda. Well, it's interesting because first of all you can think, well, this is an old story, doesn't make any sense today. Well, in 2005, a very famous writer from that area, he did an interview with a right-wing journal owned by the Berlusconi family, Il Giornale, and he started again this discussion about the Communist Party taking, advantage of the disaster for political reasons. So it's pretty much it's something that is going on still today. And just to give you an example, the former member of the Communist Party, they replied to this interview, saying, no, it's not true. We were not taking advantage of the massacre, of this disaster. We were, really interested in helping people. We were not politicizing the event. And I think that this is so wrong. It's so wrong, because they were politicizing the event. But because the event was already political, they was just uncovering a landscape which was political much earlier than they arrived, because it was political. It was political the way in which the corporation got the permission. It was a political landscape made of turbines and kilowatts, of flux of capital and energy. It was a political landscape made by private property and common property. And again, the last thing that I would like to stress here, I said struggle over recognition, over compensation, but also over memory. Well, the story that I am telling you is a story that has been completely obliterated in Italian history for a long time. And the story was recovered not by an environmental historian, I wish I were, but from actually an actor, Marco Polini, who's actually a student of Dario Fo that you might know. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature a few years ago. So Marco Polini did an historical research into this. And it was it was somebody not from the academic world, not an historian, who was able to uncover that story. Why that story was completely obliterated? Well, I have my theory. I think that that story didn't fit with the narrative about modernization, progress, and democratization. It was too odd. They didn't want to tell this story because this story was a story of failure. You have to think that the corporation was so eager to finish the work, not because they were, quick, they want to be quick, because there was a law, and they needed to make the reservoir working very soon, because they needed to sell their reservoir and everything actually to the state, because there was the nationalization of the electric system, electric energy in Italy. So they needed to sell to the state a plant which was perfectly working. So this is why they were running so fast. I said so a struggle over memory, and I would like to tell you the final story. In 2003, finally, the local municipality, Longarone, got the money from the corporation, as a compensation. And they decided to do something for the community. What they did, they erased the old cemetery of Fortogna, where the people were buried there, and they built a new memorial for the victims of the disaster. The new memorial is now a very, well done memorial. Everything is, in shape, and there are just marble blocks with the name of the people. Well, you can say well done. Well, it's not exactly, because actually I believe that this was a way of anesthetizing suffering and rage, imposing some kind of antiseptical remembrance of the story. Because in Fortogna there was another cemetery before that, and the cemetery was made by the local people. Just to give you an example, there was one stone made by family, and the stone said, here there are 6 people from the same family killed by the greed of capitalism, corporate power. They are still waiting for justice. Well, there is no space for such stone anymore. Just a marble block with the name. And I would stop.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was really so
Is there anybody who has some comment, question? Please.
Hi.
Can you tell us who you are? So,
My name is Alejandro. I'm from Spain. I'm coming from University of Michigan, studying environmental justice in University of Michigan, and I found a really interesting story about the importance of knowledge and expertise when it comes to science and technology policy, and how who gets to choose who is considered an expert for a particular decision, and having the so-called experts versus the experiential experts that are their voices are unheard, and they knew it was going to happen, but their opinion was not considered. So I'm interested in knowing also when it comes to these kind of decisions and the repercussions, there's also the concept of trust about the decision makers that took that decided to build or to allow the building of the dam. And I'm just wondering if the catastrophe had any effect on trust to those decision makers that allowed this decision. I mean, I don't know if Italians ever trusted their politicians, but but I don't know if this had any consequence on the trust that the general population has to those politicians and the decisions they made, and the problems that decision had, if it has impacted trust towards the politicians, or decision makers.
you prefer to take other
As
question?
you wish.
If is there somebody else, please read.
Just a curiosity on the history. Why did the corporation choose this local? That well, it seems that they, in a way, knew this could. It was risky. It could happen, this accident, and they just didn't look at it, didn't care, no, because they were greedy. But why choosing this place and not other that would be profitable also without these risks? So why this place?
I also want to make a question. I would like you to elaborate a little bit on the implications that this story can have for contemporary struggles and activists. Because it seems to me that not much has changed in terms of the legitimation of grassroots or activists' knowledge that may, slow down the progress of this kind of projects. For example, we experienced quite the same disputes around ways of managing the waste in Campania. So I want you to say something about that.
I think three.
Yes.
And then we
It's
take
enough.
other things.
So, first of all, trust in expert. Well, the story is very interesting because first of all, we have to consider that the majority, the mainstream narrative about the Bayonne disaster was that the experts, the technical experts, they were very good. And there was the dam proving that. The dam was still there. So actually, everybody in Italy were saying that it was just, a very terrible, accident. And actually, the use of words can be very, powerful, performative. If you say that it's an accident, you are making a very important statement. So, and you have to say, as I tried to say, nobody in the Italian university was willing to speak up against the corporation. Only Floriano Galvino, only one. And not just geologists, engineers, hydro people in the hydro kind of studies, only Floriano Galvino. So I would say that the trust in the experts was not so much, put into discussion, because in a way the mainstream narrative was able to impose some kind of truth about the story. And the story was that it was an accident, it was very unlucky. And of course, maybe some engineer didn't do his job very well, but it was not a question about, the production and legitimation of knowledge. And I think that this is very, very interesting. I cannot say, I mean, I don't see in this respect anything coming from this, at least until this actor, Marco Pollini, did this very powerful, actually storytelling, and it was on the public television, so it became very popular, and I believe that it was the first time that people discovered that, for instance, Giorgio Dal Piaz never wrote the report. He was just asking to the people paying him to write that it was okay to build a dam. No. So the people who were supposed to build the dam said that it was okay to build the dam. Second, why this place? Well, I don't think that they were, just crazy, that they were looking for. You have to consider that the Piave Valley was an extraordinary, as I said, hydroelectric lab, and there were a lot of hydroelectric power plants there. So of course you need to think about also there is something related to the scale. This corporation was operating in the region, and for them was very important to keep all their plants together in the same region. The Vaillant power plant was supposed to actually give water to a bigger power plant downstream. So for them was very important to build something there. They didn't know. They didn't know at the beginning that it was so risky. The point is that they didn't actually care so much to know that there was also an ecological and environmental context. They were pretty much concerned about building a strong arched dam, the highest arched dam at that time, and they did. And they did a good job, because the dam is still there. But they didn't understand that the issue there was to also be careful about what was going on then. What happened is that when they knew that it was dangerous, because then they knew that it was dangerous, it was too late. Because there was the law that for the nationalization of energy in Italy, so they needed to sell, as I said, a working hydro power plant. They couldn't just say, okay, this. It's not like a small car that you say, oh my God, I didn't do good. I made a bad choice, so I need to trash this car. It was a huge amount of capitals, and so they needed to make the reservoir and the old system working anyway. So at that point, you are right. They decided to go for making things working anyway, because they were supposed to leave all the system very soon to the state. So they didn't care about what was happening later. No, for them the point was just to selling something that was working. About what history can teach? Well, it's always difficult, especially because I am an historian. So I would say that history can teach everything. Study history and you will change the world. The only way, we can solve the garbage crisis in Italy studying the history. Unfortunately, it's not true. I wish it was, but it's not true. And I think that it's also very egocentric, I would say. When academics, they believe that, they can actually contribute. I mean, I would like to contribute, but maybe more as an activist. I am not sure that, I am able to contribute so much. But just for the sake of trying to make an answer, first of all, I see a big difference here. And I don't know what you think, but I will say, loudly what I am thinking. And for me, the big difference is the Italian Communist Party. In the story of the Vaillant, there was the hugest communist party of the whole Western world, there. And it was a powerful organization. Tina Merlin was a very courageous woman, and she was an amazing journalist and a great environmentalist, but she was not alone. I mean, there was a party. And Giovanni Canestrini, the lawyer defending the survivors, he was not just a good guy. He was a member of the Italian Communist Party, former member of the parliament, member of the central committee of the party for a while. So there was an organization. I don't see anything like that in the present struggles. It's very messy. And I have studied one specific case, Salvador, in which actually the fascists were in charge of the protest. The Pianura case in Naples, there was in a neighborhood in which the fascists were able to stop the building of a landfill. They were very successful, actually. Probably the only one. We should think about it. Anyway, so...
but there were also mafia involved in
of course. There was also hooligans from the soccer...
paid.
Yes, sure. But they can merge together pretty well. Unfortunately, we can't.
That's a social hegemony.
Yes, they did. So yes, I mean, so I would say that the Communist Party was, for instance, is a big difference. And again, the issue about delegitimation, you're perfectly right. I would say that yes, it's important to tell this story because it's a way also to understanding where we might end up in a way. So I think it can be interesting
to be right, but to be screwed.
Exactly.
Is there, okay.
So, Irina, Eric, Daniela, and Massimo.
And then we. So,
Can
please.
Thank you for your presentation. I already had the opportunity to read your article about this, but while we were talking, I was remembering the article of Javi Raja on the case of Bhopal, where he, through the case of Bhopal, he uses to conceptualize the forms of violence that it can be incorporated to create a concept of environmental violence. Because in SEJ, we always make this mirror games between North and South. What I would like to ask you is that through this case, can you recognize forms of violence that are identified by Javi? You know the article, maybe I should, okay, of Javi, or can you identify types of violence that are similar, or do you also identify types of violence that are specific to your case or to the case of Javi, or if you don't identify kinds of violence that are specific to the north or to the south? If you know what I'm asking. I understand.
Yeah. Thank you.
Please, Eric.
Thank you, Marco. This was an absolutely fabulous story and a great example to everyone here of how political ecology can and perhaps should be done. My question is whether you haven't been a bit too modest with your introduction. Because we historians, we tell stories, and you do it exceedingly well. But as we all know, telling stories this way ain't easy. It sounds easy to listen to it, but to actually construct a story like that, we all know, is damn bloody difficult. So you also said then that as historians, we really don't do big theory. You go out and tell a story. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I think you're lying to us. So my question is, isn't it the case that in order to be able to tell the story in a fascinating, insightful way you did it, to bring these power relationships, to make them alive, you can see them when you tell the story, that the ability to do that is predicated upon a very deep theoretical understanding of how capitalism in its variegated political, economic, cultural, and scientific forms operates. And that in order to be able to do a study like that and tell the story this way, you had to spend time, years and years and years of deep theoretical reading before you were able to do that.
Okay, first Daniel and then Massimo, and then we take other questions after.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Well, great to ask this after Eric's observation because, well, I think I was there in October and more or less from the area, and there was exactly the day where there were two forms of commemoration, let's say, the official one with the president of the government, the chief of the government, and another active memory, let's say, in the small village of Feldrecht. And actually, I have two questions looking at that. One is if you can help us from a historical point of view to define what environmental justice is and means for you as a historian. Because, for example, if you look at the company, the Sadek, which was the company that Marco talked about, it was a private company at the beginning, owned by members of the fascist intelligentsia, for example. And the company was after that nationalized, and the nationalized company inherited also the debt. So this is also an aspect of environmental justice from a historical point of view, as I see it. So I wonder how you see it. And the second question is about the role of memory. So, for example, the so-called victims today somehow embody this kind of histories, this kind of stories that Eric is mentioning now that historians can write. So the victims also embody somehow the history, the stories that have been told, that have been written, and that have become hegemonic. And now, for example, between the victims, between the various villages, there are quite a lot of differences, let's say. Some want to be seen as victims of the disaster, some other do not want to be seen as such. So, yeah, again on memory, how you see the role of memory.
Sure. Passing.
Yes. I just want to ask a question about the last point you made about the Communist Party, which, in a sense, I mean, given the historical context, the Communist Party was an important presence. But I don't understand how, on the question of reflecting on the now, it seems that you are kind of showing a bit of a nostalgia of that. As if today, I mean, today there are a variety of networks of radicals, of social movements that in fact have played the role in the case of Bhopal. Is an example, but in the many horrors we witness today in the global political economy, I mean, enclosures, I mean, the Bayonne was premises on expropriation of commons. I mean, this is now happening everywhere. I mean, the last 30 years have been an acceleration on this, but also the struggles and also the denunciations of those have been accelerating without having one major figure working through the rete, the network of things. You know, this last point reminded me when I first went to Britain in the 90s and kind of looking around how the left and the radical milieu was operating. I was wondering, I remember once I was eating with some members of the Socialist Worker Party there, and I was wondering, why don't you have, I don't understand, why don't you have free radio stations of the movements here? And one of the answers was, well, we didn't have the Communist Party here. I said, well, we actually created in spite of the Communist Party, right? It's not as because of the Communist Party. It was a way to autonomize discourse within the radical left, that we had free radio stations. So that's what I wanted to point out and see what were your reactions.
Thank you. Next one.
I'm supposed to say something. No, well, let's start with Eric. If I told you a lie or not. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's true that when I say that, you know, historians, they essentially are storytellers. It's true that what is interesting here is how to build the story, no? Because the story is not out there, no, and you just tell the story. You actually construct the story. And the way in which you decide, first of all, the story that you choose, because as I said, nobody was telling the story of the Vajont for a long time. No historians have done this, actually, more or less. So the story that you choose, and then the way in which you construct your narrative, of course it's coming from, your theoretical understanding, in my case, of, how capitalism works, and, I am actually looking for stories that can make this clear. In a way, this is the real trick that I am doing, picking the stories and try to build the story in this way. Well, about my deep theoretical readings and my, I would say that I am not sure that I was lying. Maybe saying it's not that I am really weak, but I will leave you with the doubt. So you might, you might believe that I am just modest, but I must say that I am not completely sure that I am just modest. Second, about the nostalgia, and well, Massimo, you are right. I mean, speaking in terms of my personal biography, I can tell you that there is something true about this. It's just that I have been member of the party for a long time, and sometimes I feel lost in this network of too many organizations with no organization, and with a very strong attitude between splitting in several groups, and especially trying to be the real radicals, not as you, but more radical. It seems the most important things. And so it's true. I mean, biographical, I can confess my sin here. So I live sometimes in some forms of nostalgia. But since I am supposed not to to confess, but to give a lecture, let's try to say something more intelligent than this. Well, I was just making a point. I think that if we can see a difference, I would say that the difference between a huge kind of class organization, also the unions were very involved with the Vajont case. The lawyers and all. At a certain point, the trial was moved from the area of the Vajont, so more or less from the Venetian area, to L'Aquila, which is more or less in the center part of Italy, pretty much close to Rome. This was done because according to the lawyers from the defense, there was some risks. There was something that is called suspicion. So the idea was that having the trial in the region where the Vajont actually happened was very dangerous for having a fair trial, because the people were too emotional. So the trial was moved to another place, to another city. I am telling this because it was very challenging, very difficult for people from that area, in the Alps, to go to L'Aquila and be involved in the process. So it was the unions that actually organized buses going up and forth from L'Aquila to the Vajont. So there was an organization, but I am not. I mean, speaking about nostalgia, I know also a lot of problems in that organization, because Tina Merlin was not alone, it's sure, but she never became a major figure in the party, for sure. And Stefania can tell us about other people in the Communist Party, especially women like Laura Conti. They were all very influential for the starting of a different kind of environmentalism, but they were stuck. They never became important figure in the big Communist Party, and never, of course, became important figure in the very small green or whatever environmentalist movement in Italy. They were just, in the middle, without. So, and again, I mean, that the Communist Party was pretty much involved with the atomic energy in Italy. I mean, the party was pretty much split in two, but I mean, a huge part of the party was actually supporting atomic energy. So I am, my nostalgia, besides my personal background, I can see all the problems in this. And I think that what is nice about this new movement, actually I think it's in the end of my article, that there is not only Politbureau giving orders, no, but there is a polycentric way of, an autonomous way of creating alternatives. And I can tell you that the Communist Party, I mean, they were not creating alternative in a way. They were pretty much part of the system anyhow. And we could even argue that they were part of the problem of not creating alternatives. So my nostalgia can be easily, tamed by my... Sorry?
You're clear.
Yeah. Yes, well, it's thanks to my very deep knowledge of theory that I can answer. Speaking about the the issue of memory. Well, the issue of memory is very important. The case of the cemetery is amazing, I believe. Now, it's really the imposition of a public memory of a disaster, which is erasing a collective memory, because it's not a private memory, it's a collective memory that is erased by public memory of the disaster. But it's not just the cemetery. I have been involved with this Vaillant case for a while. There is a website about the Vaillant, which is vaillant.net. And it's an amazing website. You can find all the documents about the Vaillant. And this website was shut down probably 1 year ago, and it became actually an international case. I think that Anonymous was intervening to support this guy, Tiziano D'Alfarra. He was under trial because he was accused to say something very harsh against Berlusconi's party. And so the website was closed and so on. And they actually created another website which was, apolitical, or if you wish, political. There was no issue about political. It was just the memory, the true memory of sorrow and mourning and the death of the poor people and so on. While Tiziano was pretty much a political effort in uncovering the story of the Vaillant. So the issue of memory is pretty much, and I know what you are saying. I know that there were two commemorations of the disaster, and actually also the issue of the name, how to call this, it's very controversial. In my book I speak about the genocide, for instance, and the publisher said that I was not supposed to use the word, and so I said I cannot publish the book without using the word. Why? Because genocide, of course, is not the proper word, but Sandro Canestrini, the lawyer, the communist lawyer, he wrote an incredible book, which is actually his speech in the trial, which is entitled Vaillant, it's a genocide of poor people. And he tried to explain, and actually there is a very powerful quotation that I have here. If you wish, I can read it, but anyway, it's a little bit long. So the main point that Canestrini said in that book and in the speech to the court was that is that you are forcing me to defend my reasons in the Agramant field. The Agramant field is a way to say in the field of the enemy, because we are here to using your law, which is middle class bourgeoisie law. We are here to defend my people in a city, in a place which is not mine. We are here to discuss about something that didn't happen, because you want to discuss about something which was negligence, while I want to discuss about murder, about killing people. So he said, I curse you because you are pushing me to play my card on a table which is not mine. But I dare you, come to the mountains, I will give you my justice. So this is a little bit also what maybe Eric was saying about, are we asking somebody to deliver some kind of justice? Or justice is something that it's not possible to be delivered by the same people who actually, created the injustice in the first place. So speaking about what is environmental justice and also the difference between North and South. Well, of course there are differences. I mean, Felipe can explain better than I can how native people, indigenous people, they paid a high price in terms that they are not there anymore. It was a really genocide in that case. I mean, you can still have survivors there. And of course there was some kind of trial, you can get this kind of recognition, but it is the same in Bhopal, if you think. I mean, there is a process, even if I remember correctly, it's not the kind of process that they were looking for, actually. And another thing that I would suggest about the difference between North and South is also a little bit the kind of imagination in which these events are placed. Because in a way, the people from from the Vajont Valley, they didn't understand, in the first place, their story in a framework of, colonial power. It was not, the actually colonial power. And this was the case. You can see actually a very kind of colonial dynamics happening there. But they didn't have, how can I say, the framework to frame this. They were more thinking about, corruption or something like that, and not so much in terms of an imperial colonial power. Why? Because, well, for them it was very important to say that they were part of the empire. They were not, outside. They were not outsiders. And so maybe this is also a little bit part of the story, the struggle of the people to recognize their own positionality into the hierarchy of what is happening. I think that this might be also a little bit a difference here. And, well, maybe it's too much. And I don't have anything else to say.
Because I know that there are, among the entitled students, there are at least two I know, which is Amelie Hoover, who is studying dams in Sikkim, and then I think Santiago wrote about
Sure.
Riva del Lago in Spain. I don't know whether you are aware, but which was very different in a way, and the Franco, even the newspapers didn't talk about 200 people killed or whatever. But there is like a statistics of how many dams fail, and you lived in that place, so this is called the International Rivers Networks sitting. And also how many dams provoke floods, because they retain the water too much. This happens in the western Himalayas in India. So you have not sort of making of this case one piece in a comparative analysis or getting a book with other people to write about dam failure, because it's not, would support your view that it's not an accident in many ways, but it's not an accident even in a kind of statistical sense, although we don't know exactly the probability. And then you could say whether the Communist Party makes such a difference, or whether there are other kind of activists who complain, or whether there are no activists at all because they are not allowed to complain, nobody, whether this comes from neoliberal or from state capitalism or from Maoist,
Yes.
because dams are a symbol of modernity, as Patrick Macaulay actually making his book of 96, that's why I'm getting
So, Amelie, Santiago, and John. John, no, Giacomo, no.
No, I said something.
So very much related to John's question, I would like to ask you to imagine that you are a scholar or a student of political ecology before the disaster, but with a good knowledge of all the risks involved, so whatever knowledge local people have, with an access to this kind of local knowledge, how you would go into a study of this kind of situation?
I am a historian. We always are there when everything happened already,
Think about it.
We started by asking us how many of us knew of the case, and that makes me think about the process of silencing. We finished by saying that this story has been obliterated. But how do you document processes of silence? I mean, isn't it problematic to create a narrative of the silencing of something, because it's precisely the opposite? And maybe here thinking of Riva del Lago in Spain, which was a few years before it's true, it is a dictatorship, but it is still in the newspapers. It's first page, it's in the newsreels, it is.
It was.
So then later it's challenging, at least for me, because it's true true it's been silent, no one knows. You ask about it and no one knows. But still you go to the immediately first years or days before, after it happened, and it is there. So to create this later this explanation or to fundament somehow the statement that it has been silent, how to work on it? I mean, it's an open question.
Okay. Giacomo and Blas.
Marco, I would like to ask to you if you can let's say share with us the different ideas of justice that probably you met studying these cases. Now, the way in which different actors claim to be in some way compensated or not, in some way recognized as victims or not, and so on and so forth. I think this is very important because we are having since the first day, I would say, of this session, a discussion about justice, and I think it could be useful to understand if there was different voices claiming for different things inside this history, no? Just to simplify, I want to simplify Carter. I know, for example, in this history, there were people claiming for popular tribunals, for example, and there was a period in which popular tribunal were a way in which they want to solve the problem. If you can just give some information about this.
Okay. It's me, no?
Sì.
Yes. So, well, first of all, Johannes, you are right, and I know a little bit about something about the environmental history of Soviet Union, for instance, and I know the importance of the shaping of landscape and rivers also in Soviet Union, and I believe that Lenin said something about communism and hydropower, I believe. So, yes, for sure, and I think that you are right also thinking about how can we, making a comparative approach. It could be interesting to see the difference, so, with protest and without protest, with a huge organization, whatever, Communist Party, and without, and so on. I didn't do that, and actually what I am doing now is to write an environmental history of the Vajont, and using essentially the category of environmental justice and capital escape. So the idea is that the Vajont is not a natural disaster into the alpine landscape, but is a social disaster into the capital scale of the production of hydropower in Italy. So I don't have the kind, but I agree with you, and I think that probably it would be a very good idea to think about something like a collective work. I would say that this can be also interesting to do. Speaking about the how to deal with something that's been silenced and that it's not there, it's not in the memory of people, of country, and so on. How can you do this? Well, first of all, it's a little bit, I think that we need to be clear about this. When we speak about something that's been silenced, doesn't mean necessarily that no one has spoken about it. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I mean, if you go online and you look, for the Vajont, you will find video documentaries made by the Italian public television. You will find a lot of, the first pages of the old newspapers were about the disaster. And now that there is the 50 years from the disaster, you will find a lot of articles and documentaries and so on about the disaster. So the issue is not how many articles have been published, how many words have been said, but what has been said. I think that the disaster was silenced because it was not said that it was the product of, of the way of the, it was the product of the imposition of capitalistic way of production on that landscape and on that people. But it's not that nobody was speaking about this. So I think that what is interesting, and maybe somebody would say that this is the trick, you know, that we are just telling story, but actually we are remaking the stories, because the story was there, was in that video documentary, it's in the newspapers, it's everywhere. It's in the official celebration that you were remembering, you know, that you were recalling there. But we want to tell a different story. So we made our choice in this sense. And I think that the point here is to make your, you know, to take the opportunity to say what you think is relevant in the story, and to try to have an interpretation of what was going on, and maybe even to try to understand why something was hidden, why the story, because the point is not that nobody has told the story, but the point is which kind of story has been told, which is much more powerful, because if it's not just you know, unknown, well, you can start your own story. What is really difficult is to change the narrative. If there is a mainstream narrative which has been posed, well, it became very difficult to change it, and it's maybe even more challenging than telling, you know, it from scratch, from nothing. Speaking about what I would do if I were there before, oh my, it's really difficult. I don't know, I think that, first of all, I don't know if it makes sense, but you know, for me, in this research, has been very interesting, very, I would say, crucial. You know, in my article, I say that it's important seeing like a protester. So I really believe this. But for this research, has been very significant to me seeing like a bad guy, like an engineer, like an entrepreneur, like the people in the corporation. So I don't know if this could help, but I think that this is interesting, this is important, to try to see with their eyes. Because, the landscape is not out there, it's not that you can see. It's just the lens that you use that are, you know, projecting the landscape. If you want to change the landscape, you have to know the landscape that other people are actually seeing and creating, so in a way. The second thing that I would say is that, well, in the story of the Beyond, I think that it's important, I mean, if I were there, I would say that it's important to try to go for all the paths that can, you know, deliver some kind of solutions. I mean, this is interesting. When Tina Berlin was on trial in Milan in 1959 for the first article she published, well, actually, the judges in Milan, they said that she was right, the newspaper was right, and the corporation was doing something, you know, dangerous for the valley. Well, somebody should have, you know, go ahead with that, and nobody did. So speaking not in terms of changing the world, but, you know, not getting 2,000 people dead, which is also nice. Sometimes I would try to explore all the possibility. For sure, something that completely was missing here is any kind of international network. Well, it was, you know, the 50s, come on. Which international for you? There was no internet, nothing. But it's interesting because then, in the third phase of the resistance, the international network. I need to close, no?
No, I want to define it.
So well, I am closing. It's too long. But in the last phase of the resistance, what I have called the last phase of the resistance, the international network was, you know, the only tool that they had. As I said, the experts working for the survivors and for the public, they were all people from abroad. There was somebody from France, there was another guy from the Czechoslovakian Republic at that time, somebody from the Yugoslavia. You can also make some connection. And somebody from, I think, the German Democratic Republic, or whatever in English. The other guys, let's say, beyond the wall. And there was also an American, actually. But the poor guy couldn't get to Italy because he was from America, from the US. So his government asked the Italian government to send a letter and to invite him officially to help with this. And guess what? The letter never arrived. So, well, this is something very naive, I would say, and I don't have, of course, a good. But I would say that the international dimension is so crucial, and it's something that they couldn't actually exploit so much. Even if they did, in the end, it was a little bit late. But for instance, in the memory, the struggle of memory is very relevant. I mean, the people in the Bayonne, they of course they have been killed, but they also have been killed in terms of memory, because then they got a lot of money as compensation, especially from the state, not so much from the corporation. So the mainstream narrative about them is that they were lazy, drunk people living out of us. We were giving money to those people. Why don't you start your life? Why you are waiting for our help and so on? So they were killed twice, because they were killed, and because they were killed by this, collective memory about them, collective narrative about them. But now there is also this counter memory of the Bayonne disaster. Somebody invited me in Spain, for instance, to discuss about the Bayonne and to tell them the story of the Bayonne and to connect the story of the Bayonne with other stories. So something that we can also do is try to make these connections. Speaking about the garbage, and this is the thing that I am going to say. Well, the activists in Naples, they invited me several times to discuss with them. And of course I am completely useless. I am not a chemist. I cannot tell them, if an incinerator is good or not. I cannot do any soil checking if the soil is contaminated or not, and so on and so forth. So what I did, I told them some stories. And I told them the story of Chester, Pennsylvania, the hugest African-American communities polluted by a huge incinerator. And what was interesting is that they were very excited by the idea of not being alone, to be connected, part of a collective story of oppression and resistance. So then, when they invited me another time to a huge event with all the activists in Campania, an activist, a Gideon, needed to introduce myself. And I was thinking, okay, he will say I am director of something, professor of something else, or PhD in something. And he said, this is Marco. He lives abroad, and once he told me who we are. And I think it was a very nice presentation.
Yeah, and just to add this, the activists that actually listen to these stories, I'm meeting with them in my fieldwork, and they are the most aware of the global, issue. In the fact that, that they do not just blame one politician, but they are aware that this is something bigger. So actually, stories are powerful in this sense, because help building also political strategies for future struggles. Okay. There is coffee, but I want to see in 15 minutes